get to the time frame that we have. Rabbi Jacobson, to start with, chinuch in the 21st century, what comes to mind? How would you define it? You do.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your good wishes. Don't count that in my time. It's an honor to be here. So I guess the best way to answer that question is really, we're talking here chinuch, Chassidish chinuch, 21st century, which would of course mean the challenges that we have that are unique to this time, which in many ways is very different than the 20th century and previous times, especially after Gimel Tammuz. So I would say that, let's start with this. It's a mere fact that the exposure, if you look at in Jewish history, 200-300 years ago, even less, Jews, especially Chassidim, lived in insulated shtetlach, where there were no challenges from the outside world. There was no such thing as a mobile phone. There was no such thing as exposure b'chlal to anything except that which you grew up with. So the number one is the great challenge that we're no longer living in a world where there's defense as possible, and therefore the best defense is offense, which only underscores how important Chassidus is and the Rebbe's approach to preempt issues, because we're literally living in the battle zone, and every single second is not neutral. We're constantly exposed, every age, including children of course, to all the different forces and influences that are not necessarily holy. And if you don't have a solid and powerful offense, how to deal with that, it's almost impossible to protect ourselves from it. That's the first thing that stands out mostly. On the other hand, the Rebbe says in Sichos that the reason Chassidus was revealed in these days, the end of time before Mashiach, number one was for this reason, because it's darker, so we need greater light to counter the darkness. And number two, because it's a taste, like Erev Shabbos, a type of appetizer and taste of Teimel Chaim Zochel, of what is coming, Messianic times. So even though they sound like two contradictory reasons, but the fact is, it's it's interdependent, because when there's darker place, you need to have stronger light, and that light is a Mashiach light. So I think the 21st century in that way captures that paradox, that on one hand, we have great challenges, but on the other hand, we were given unbelievable resources that previous generations never were given. So we have unbelievable resources, faculties, forces, and bekeches, and that's our real job, is to learn how to tap into that potential, which, there's no question that we would never ask to do a challenge that we weren't given the power to overcome. And I think that as the crux of the biggest challenge that every chinuch, every parent has, every educator has, how do we tap into those deep resources in ways that can be viable and practical and help our children become, live up to their great potential and be proactive Chassidish Jews instead of being on the defense and protecting themselves from the negative. That's how I would capture the 21st century's picture. I think I went over 3 minutes, there was no buzz, but that's
We're actually good. 2 minutes, 59 seconds.
Wow. Okay. I've been doing this a long time.
Very good. Rabbi Lieberman, what are my halachic obligations as a parent towards the education of my children?
So just to be brief and to stay within the time limit, first of all, thank you, and thank you all. But the Alter Rebbe, publisher Shulchan Aruch, as you know, and he has a specific section there called Hilchos Talmud Torah, where he states unequivocally that it's the obligation of a parent, particularly a father, to educate his children in the ways of Torah. We read in Shema every day that you should teach this to your children so that they speak of these words. And as the Alter Rebbe explains, that is specifically a mitzvah saseh. It's a specific mitzvah that we have to educate our children. It's our duty. Sometimes, at least in the community where I live, people ask me, what are my rights as a parent, things like that. And I always tell them, and I tell the students in my school, you're a parent, you actually have no rights. Not only do you have no rights, but in Judaism, people don't have rights, you only have obligations. And it's our obligation to educate our children. You have a child, it's a privilege, and it's a duty to do that. And the Alter Rebbe lists specifically what the ages are, and what ages he was supposed to learn what, etc., etc. But it's clear that it's a parent's obligation. And we know the story with Alter Rebbe when he at first enlisted a teacher, a malamed, to learn with his son. And the Alter Rebbe said to him, I have an obligation, I need to teach my children. You have an obligation to support your family. I'll help you support your family, and you teach my child. So I think that's what the Alter Rebbe speaks clearly for us today, that it's our duty as parents to educate our children, to be involved in their education, and to partner with the institutions and teachers who do that, but not to walk away from it and say, look, it's the school's obligation, I did my job and I paid my tuition, and, as long as I have the cup, let them have that.